My name's Tom Lee, and I teach the Service and Interaction Studio within the Masters of Design. So it's a postgraduate coursework program, and as a result, the student cohort is varied in lots of different ways. So we have people who are coming straight from an undergrad program looking to add a little bit more sophistication to their education that way. We have people who've been out in the industry for 7 or so years who are looking to come back and refresh after their first stint in industry, and we have people who've been working for sort of 15 plus years who are looking to completely pivot into a new area. The type of places we expect our students to end up working: user experience, interaction design, anything to do with design in the digital realm is a big focus for us. Consultancies and banks, in terms of the scale of opportunity for employment, are often the largest places. Sydney has a very strong banking sector, and increasingly large teams of designers work within banks. So that's one place, and the other place is big consultancies as well, in addition to the usual design agencies and small to medium enterprises as well. The main difference between the type of student in the postgrad and undergrad realm is that you can take for granted motivation when they're in the postgraduate realm. All the students are very, very motivated, they're all very driven, and sometimes their level of skill might be more varied, but if you give them a resource to go and use, they will really use that a lot. And they're also a little bit, tend to have a more agency when it comes to asking things of you, I think. When you're in the undergrad learning environment, you perhaps take for granted a little bit more, whereas postgraduate students have been out in the world and they know how to shape a situation a little bit more so it works for them, which I think in the end is a positive thing for the teaching and learning experience, because working together with the student cohort, you end up working out what's best for both of you a little bit more quickly and more comprehensively. You have to take for granted a certain amount of functional or specialist skills. If students have come through an undergrad degree already, you want to start to focus more on how to apply those skills in a range of different contexts. You will typically be less programmatic in terms of the teaching methods and models that you use, avoiding sort of step-by-step approach. And everything I say about postgrad teaching, when I say it now, I think that applies to some extent to the undergrad teaching experience as well, but maybe it's just a matter of balance. It doesn't apply quite so fully. I'll say there's 2 types of students, which is a gross oversimplification, but you still get the students who are like your lifelong learner, maybe always will be unsure of whether what they're doing is the right thing to be doing. Maybe will always be a little bit unsatisfied, thinking that the best thing is elsewhere, and that can be a good or a bad situation depending on how well adjusted you are to that mode. And then you get the students who do want a really specific thing out of their learning experience. They've gone and worked in industry for a while, and the romance associated with being employed in that industry that existed when they finished their undergrad has somewhat diminished, and now you realise that no, I don't want to be doing this, I want to be doing something else. And that might be really specific, what the something else that you want to be doing, and it might be vague as well. So one of the things that the principles that we employ when we're coming up with curriculum for the studio that I teach is that the briefs that the students are working on have to be exciting kinds of briefs that give the students a chance to work on complex problems that they have a lot of agency over, which is the kind of situation that they most likely would not be in if they were working in a design job having come straight out of undergrad. There's no good teaching someone who's been working in industry for a while something that's relevant to industry. Maybe to an undergrad student that's going to be a big sell, but if you're postgrad students, like, well, this is what I get paid for. I get paid to work in industry in my day-to-day life. If I'm coming back to uni to just do that, then that's not really a value proposition for me. So it has to be, yes, relevant to industry, but also it's a chance to work on at a higher level on something that is exciting and complex, socially relevant, and all those kinds of things. So the most helpful way for me to understand the affordance model is to think about it as a tension between two contrasting poles, and the functional pole is towards the more programmatic, specialist, introductory style of learning, and then we pass through the perceptual to the contextual, which is more about understanding how to use something in relation to a broader context, understanding that the model that you've been taught is one way to do something, but there might be other ways to do that as well, depending on the complexities of the situation. So that was something that I implicitly understood, or understood according to other models in my teaching practice already, but this was a new way of understanding it, or making it explicit, or giving it form. In relation to the specific intervention that we did, we looked at collaboration and the way that digital tools can assist in communication and collaboration in group work exercises, and a huge amount of the work we do in our studio is group work focused. And there are lots of challenges in group work, especially when you're working on something where the conceptual element is unclear. Group work's a lot easier if you've got a clear idea of what's happening, so you can have a shared basis for decision making. But when the conceptual element is unclear, it's a real cognitive strain just communicating between, just finding a shared language as a group. So there's a huge amount of communication that has to go on, and working out a shared language, working out kind of key concepts, especially at the early stages of the work. So you've got that, and then on the other hand, you've got the situation where the people doing the class have a whole huge amount of other life that goes on outside of class. So that puts a lot of pressure on communications digitally. So like a lot of communication has to happen outside the classroom space. So collaborating together as a group digitally is a really important part to get right in the teaching space. And the university email and online communication tools aren't really sufficient to get a good user experience in that regard. So last semester I started to use the messaging software Slack. It's used commonly in industry as well, so familiarity with that is important just at that level. This is what you are probably going to use when you enter the workforce, or you've probably been using it already. It's a cutting edge tool that a lot of industry does use. And so I'd used it in the semester before, but this semester I focused on using it as the sole channel for communication, and that improved things a lot, because it reduced the amount of places that students had to check for announcements, and it's just a lot easier to just focus in on one channel. So that was the intervention around using that. But what we also focused on was actually not just taking for granted that we're going to use this tool, to actually think about why it might be better or worse, and to reflect on, would you use another tool in another context? What are the specific advantages of this? What particular kinds of communications is it useful for? And we assessed that at two different moments during the semester. At the beginning, we asked students what kinds of things they'd used that were similar to Slack in the past when they're working in a group or a collaborative environment. And then at the end, we talked about, they were surveyed on how Slack works specifically. And throughout the semester, what was happening in my head was thinking about how you can also potentially adapt Slack better to fit your purposes. And a lot of the insights that I got back from students informally was them taking more agency over like how to set up etiquettes around using Slack so it worked really well for them, and even just that provocation to start saying, okay, how can you use this to make it work better for you, encourages them to think, I think, in a more active way about all kinds of different tools that they use in group work projects as well. Like you can really make this tool work for you rather than just taking it for granted as something that is used. And that's one of the, affordance as a word is in the air in the design world. It's one of the things that people talk about a lot, particularly in relation to product design. So I think it's a good way to think about the way that a tool, what uses it proposes. So each week there were an average of 300 messages that were sent, which is a huge amount of online activity if you compare, like in the past when I'd used student email and discussion boards, barely any. You might get 20 or 30 emails or something like that. We're talking a class of 12 students. Yeah. So there's a huge amount of activity, and I think Slack really facilitates that level of online activity. We had a number of class discussions around the advantages and disadvantages of using digital communications technology for group work. And as a result of that, it was more of a presence in the classroom space as a result, like the students evaluating themselves at some targeted moments, but also I think like perpetually throughout the semester, evaluating the usefulness of the communication tools, but then also what their practices were around those tools. So like it's hard to say confidently what exactly it would have been like had we not done that, but I can compare it to the semester before where we used Slack, we used email, we used lots of different things, and it wasn't as much of a focus. But the shift in emphasis by thinking about the specific affordances of Slack created, I think, a bit of a buzz around using digital tools for group work. I think one of the specific things that I did as a result of the intervention at the beginning of semester was that we had a discussion around the naming of the channels on Slack, and the names that it gives you generically are random and general for the channels. And we had a class discussion, and it was suggested that those two names didn't actually capture some of the important ways we should categorise communications. The students wanted a section for key announcements or key details. And so I created another channel that was just for subject outline material, for time and place, for that kind of stuff. So a different way of categorising the information in response to student feedback, and them sharing in the customisation of the tool as a consequence of their feedback, I think was an important experience. And there were probably other little examples of that kind of thing happening along the way as well, where they can witness and share in and contribute to the customisation of a tool so it fits for the learning purpose. Taking control of the communicative context around group work was definitely something that I witnessed more. I had more interactions with students around using the tools we use for communication outside of class as a result. I don't think I would have had those conversations if we were just using email and not making it a matter of concern within the class. And I think that kind of thing would be a really reassuring thing to see if you were an employer, for example, and you've got one of your employees coming to you with ideas about how one channel of communication could be used for this, and maybe another one could be used for that, or how it's working well and how it's not working well, and reflecting on its usefulness for them in different kinds of contexts. I think that would be a really reassuring thing to hear, because then you know that there's this active engagement with the communication process, which is such an important part of the design industry today. Yeah, I think a key resource that we refined as a consequence of what we did is a survey form to assess the usefulness of tools like Slack, and we also did one for Zoom as well, which is another video conferencing tool. And even if the survey or feedback form that was designed for those particular tools, even if it isn't necessarily, if it doesn't work perfectly, it's still an indication that, okay, when you use these tools, be reflective in terms of how you use them and share your thoughts around that, understand that they are useful for different purposes. So I think just designing a survey for the different digital tools that you use was an example of that, yeah. It's been confirmed to me that the user experience of a particular digital tool is really important. I think the fact that Slack gives a sense of people being together in a digital space that email doesn't really ensures that there's a lot more activity being exchanged between group members as a result. So I know that to be important. I don't think you can just take it for granted that that whatever tool you've got, it will end up working if you push it hard enough. I think it really does matter that design of the different tools you use, and I think implicit in that, the fact that the design of the different tools is important, is that reflecting on the way they are designed, on their affordances, and encouraging that kind of reflection in class as a shared activity is a really important thing to find the time in the classroom space to do. And I think doing it just once at the start of semester probably isn't enough. Doing it twice probably isn't enough either. It has to be a part of the classroom ambience the whole time, I think. That you're learning content, but also you're learning how to work together as a team that exists in very peculiar conditions, i.e. you're not seeing each other every day, you're seeing each other once a week, and there are lots of other things in your life filling the time outside of class as well. I think it's relevant because some of the discussion we were having before is, this is one graphic way of thinking about a student's learning experience. It uses, it's a table. It's different to a spectrum or a manifold or any other different kinds of graphic ways of making sense of that learning experience. And as a table, it encourages classification or categorization and semantics rather than dynamics. And I think that I instinctively am drawn towards learning models that are about dynamics and relationality. So I think that the affordance model has encouraged me to think contextually about that by reflecting on its own design and own structure. Yeah, and that relates directly to my own teaching practice as well. Yeah.